All right, good morning, everybody. We are joining us today for my contract video series. Today we're talking about how to prepare a FRBAR as-is contract. It's great to see everybody this morning. Very excited on my video series here. We're doing 12 videos. This is the second of 12. And my name is Sam Saad, and we are going to talk about FRBAR as-is contract preparation today. Now, of course, I'm an attorney, so we start off with a disclaimer that I'm providing you advice, but it's not legal advice, and you can't rely on it for any other purpose. A little bit about me. I've been an attorney for over 20 years, and I specialize in real estate law. I serve on the committees that draft the NABOR and FARBAR contracts. So I know them very, very well. And my law firm handles all manner of litigation, real estate, business, estate planning, condominium and HOA law issues. So we're very familiar with the contracts, very familiar with how business is done in Southwest Florida. The other thing I want to mention today, this morning, before we get started, is I do have a title company, Paradise Coast Title and Escrow. And we are what I think is the best title company in town. If you ever have any questions or need title services, my cell phone number is on the screen and you can reach out to me anytime. So this morning, we're going to fill in a FARBAR as-is contract for an LLC buyer. It's going to be a finance transaction, so we'll talk about that. We'll review some important addenda and some disclosures, and I'll take your questions. One thing I will say is, as we go through the presentation, if you have any questions, you should feel free to shout them out anytime. I'm going to go into Form Simplicity, which is the forms file that we use, and I'm going to reshare my screen. Okay, everybody can see my screen. Looks like good. Form Simplicity is up. So this, of course, Form Simplicity is the Florida Realtors provided transaction platform. And I have preloaded the FARBAR as-is contract and the required addenda into it. So let's dive right into the contract this morning. This, of course, is your FARBAR as-is. Probably familiar with this form. Let's talk immediately. Now, we're going to be selling my house to an LLC this morning. So what I did is I went ahead and pulled up the county property appraiser's website. This is for Collier County. If you're in a different county, you, of course, use your property appraiser's website. Find the property search button. Type in the address. Of course, my address, 1163 14th Avenue North in Naples. There's my property card. This is a very important screen to know and understand because you're going to get a lot of information off this screen as we go through the contract. I'll be pointing things out that we'll be using off of this screen. So just be aware that you need to understand your property appraiser website and the property card as we go through the contract. Let's switch back over to the contract to get started. Okay, we saw from the property card, the seller is going to be Sam J. Saad III and Amy Saad. Okay. Now, my LLC buyer today, to figure out an LLC buyer or LLC seller, you have to understand the Florida, assuming it's a Florida LLC, you have to understand the Florida Division of Corporations website called the SunBiz website. SunBiz, SUNBIZ, SunBiz website. We're going to search our records. We're going to search by the name of the buyer LLC. In this case, it's going to be me because I have an old inactive LLC that I'm going to be using. You'll see on this website all the information that you need in this particular case to fill out your contract properly. I will tell you, if you go into the SunBiz website right here and you see multiple people named, of course, this only has me named, if you see multiple people named, you need to make an inquiry with your buyer as to who's going to be signing this contract and who has the authority to sign the contract for the LLC. As we can see here, the name of the LLC is Sam J. Saad III LLC. Of course, this particular LLC is inactive. That does not matter because inactive LLCs can transact business in Florida for the purposes of winding up their operations. However, normally you would want this to say active. Authorized persons, that's the person who's going to sign for the LLCs. You can see here where I'm highlighting, that's me. That's my old address. And I am the manager. This is very important. This title that I'm highlighting here, the manager of the LLC, is the person who signs. LLCs can either be member managed or manager managed, and this one is manager managed. So let's go back to the contract. This is going to be Sam J. Saad III LLC as the buyer. Notice how I'm putting that in here. If you want to be really formal, you could add a Florida limited liability company, although that's not really necessary. And it can cause issues with the signatures. Okay, so the FRBAR contract, we fill in the address of the property first here under the property section, section 1. So let's put that in 1163 14th Avenue North. Whoops. Located in, the next thing we're going to fill in, very, very important that we fill in the proper county. We're in Collier County with this property. Now, the FRBAR contract requests the property identification number. So we go back to the property card. We've got the parcel ID number here at the top. Parcel ID, we're going to fill that in. Real property, the legal description is our next blank under 1C. Legal description, we do not need the complete legal description. We need the short legal description here off the property card. So let's grab that, copy that. Paste that in right there. So now we know what we're selling. This is very important because we want to know what we're selling. We're selling 1163 14th Avenue North, Naples, Florida, 34102 in Collier County with our property ID and our legal description. Up next, the FRBAR contract talks about the personal property in very general terms, unless excluded under paragraph 1E or other terms of this contract, the following things convey, and it lists them and calls them personal property. And this is not a detailed contracts class. This is how to fill in the contract, so I'm not getting into all the details, but just know that if you want my washer and dryer, you have to type it into other personal property included in this purchase. If I want to take the Wi-Fi system with me, we'll call it the Starlink, which I do not have Starlink, but we'll just pretend. Starlink system. Under paragraph E, these are the items that are excluded from the purchase. Now, it's very important that you have a detailed conversation with your buyer and the seller about what's included and what's excluded. If you need to do an inventory, for those of you that were on my neighbor video, you saw we had an inventory. FRBAR does not provide a specific inventory form, so you would want to type in something like see attached inventory, and then you need to create an inventory. We're not going to do that today. We're just going to convey the washer and dryer that exist on the property. Okay, up next is the purchase price. Very important section, obviously. Top line number, the purchase price. We're going to pretend my house is worth $3.5 million. We hope it is. This number, of course, super important number for you because it's the number that the compensation is determined from. It's also the number that the documentary stamp taxes are calculated off of. It's also the number the title insurance is calculated off of. So don't mess up the purchase price. We're going to do deposit on this transaction. We're going to say that the deposit shall be made within 5 days. That's 5 calendar days. This contract uses calendar days like all contracts in the standard contracts in Florida do. Except of course for HOA, which is business days, but we're not going to get into that. And we're going to say we're going to put down $50,000 as our initial deposit. You'll notice as I fill in this form, it's calculating automatically here on line 42. Will allow me to highlight that, yes. This is going to automatically calculate. So let's just say that we're going to do an inspection on our as-is, and I'll talk about the inspection period later. Let's say we're going to have a 15-day inspection period. So on the 16th day, the seller wants an additional, let's say, $300,000 deposit in escrow. And then we're going to finance this, and we're going to say we're going to get a $2 million loan on this property. So there's our financing. Now, I'll tell you, this financing number is so important. There are several cases in Florida now that have held that the contract is, the buyers lost their deposit because the contract wasn't clear as to the kind of loan that was being applied for, and that the buyer actually properly applied for the loans listed in the contract. So don't skip this blank here for financing on a finance transaction. If you wanted to put in other, if mom and dad were giving a gift, you could put that in here and put some number in here. On line 40, we're not going to have a gift today. So this is how you fill out. Don't forget your escrow information. Paradise Coast Title and Escrow is going to handle the closing for the buyer LLC. Don't forget your address, your email address, and your phone numbers. These are required for realtors to put in the contract by Florida Administrative Code. So don't skip that, or you're going to be in violation of Florida law. Time for acceptance is our next section, section 3. Now, this contract does not give a specific time. So if you want a specific time, you would have to write it in. We're going to give one business day, August 8th, that's tomorrow, to get this contract in. And we're not going to wait all day till 11:59 p.m. So we're going to put a time in here of 8 o'clock p.m. August 8th, 2025. See how I did that? I just typed in the number, the time. Now we know that this offer has to be responded to, or it's gonna be withdrawn automatically by 8 p.m. tomorrow. Up next, our closing date in paragraph 4. Very important, obviously, closing date. Now we said this is financed. This is going to be a conventional financing. So let's give ourselves a 30-day close. Go out here now, 30 days in our case from August 7th takes us to a Sunday. We don't like to close on Mondays and Fridays, and we do not like to close on the last day of the month, or really the middle of the month. So let's take ourselves out to September 9th, Tuesday. A nice day to close on is a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday. We don't like closing on Mondays and Fridays because Mondays, the title company is catching up from the weekend, and Fridays, if there's a problem, now somebody's not going to get their money in or out until Monday the next week, and that's very bad for the parties. So let's just pick a Tuesday. September 9th is our close date. Now, the next blank we have to look at is whether the property is subject to a lease. If the property is subject to a lease, we check the box here on line 72, and that gives the buyer and seller some additional obligations and options. They have, seller has 5 days to get the leases that are the property is subject to over to the buyer, who then has 5 days to review and terminate if they don't like them. This is not a leased property, so we're going to uncheck that box, and we're not going to worry about leases. Now, the next section is very, very, very important, the assignability. The default in Florida is that contracts are freely assignable. The default in the FRBAR contract is that the contract is not assignable. So we changed the default of Florida law in this contract here on the last line that I'm trying to highlight now. So we're going to say the contract may be assigned, but the buyer may not be released from liability. What does that mean? If this LLC buyer wants to flip this property, for example, and sell and have somebody else be the buyer and they just take a fee, that's fine. I don't care because I'm the seller and I'm getting rid of the property and I know my sale price. But I want to make sure that I know who I'm dealing with, so I don't want the buyer that I know to be released from liability. Your other options, of course, are to assign and be released or to not allow an assignment. We're going to allow assignments but not released. All right, before I get into financing, does anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat. Okay, not seeing anybody unmute themselves. All right, let's talk about financing. The FRBAR finance contingency is very confusing and very simple. It's simple in the fact that you check box B right here for financing. You have a contingency period. We said we're doing a 30-day close. So let's do a 25-day loan approval period.
Sam?
Yes, I hear a question.
It's
Yes.
Kathy He. Yeah, it's Kathy He. Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button.
Go ahead, Kathy.
You know, on the LLC, Sam,
Yep.
if there are multiple people who could sign, you just need the manager to sign, or can anybody sign?
You need to, that's a great question. That's a fantastic question. I was going to talk about that more on the signature block section, but you have to review the operating agreement of the LLC and determine who has the authority to sign. This usually takes the assistance of an attorney, but it's a step you cannot skip because you want to make sure the parties are properly bound. So you saw on my example, I'm showing on the screen now, we have a named manager. So the manager, and it's one manager, so we can assume from the articles of organization, which are available down here, and there's posts, and this is really what they look like, that the manager can sign for this LLC. If this said member, MBR, or if there were multiple members or multiple managers, that would be a clue that you would need a further inquiry and you would need to talk to your buyer or your seller, whoever the LLC is, and discuss with them who signs and review the operating agreement to make sure it's correct. So it's not an easy answer to your question, unfortunately, Kathy.
Thank you.
You have to dig in and understand it. Okay, back to financing, unless there are other questions. Okay. So we're doing a 25-day loan approval period. See this defined term here, loan approval period, very important. You have 25 days to get your loan approved. We're going to do a conventional loan, not FHA, not VA, or other, which could be like a USDA or a SHIP loan. We're going to do a fixed rate of interest. We want an interest rate that's not going to exceed, in this case, we're going to say 7.5% because interest rates are a little high right now. And then I don't leave blanks. I don't like to leave blanks in the contract. A lot of people will skip this next blank and just say that they'll 30-year financing, no problem. I type in the 30. So fill in your blanks. That way, if a judge ever were to say, well, you didn't fill it in all the way, that leaves an ambiguity. Even though there's a default, we don't want personal liability as the realtor for skipping a blank. So let's be careful to fill in all of our blanks. We're going to give the buyer, in this case, 5 days to make application for financing. I think that's a little long. It should probably be 3 days. We'll do 3 days in this case. If you leave it blank, then the default is 5 days. But given the Lafont case, Lafont was a terrible case that took away the buyer's deposit for failing to properly apply for a loan. As a realtor, you need to have a conversation up front with your buyer about their financing and their plan for financing, and you need to fill this contract in properly. So giving 3 days shouldn't be a big deal because in a finance transaction, hopefully you've already met with and spoken to the lender. So this fills in the terms of the financing. Like I said, we're not doing a deep dive on financing today. I have another class for that coming up in a couple of weeks. But we got our financing terms. Now, up next, we see two blanks here for other and other for closing costs. I do leave these two blanks blank, or I'll type in an NA, or there may be a broker transaction fee of broker transaction fee of, I don't know, let's say $2.95. So you type that in if that existed. The next blank is the title evidence and title insurance. So this is a really interesting blank. FRBAR, the way they handle this blank is they say if you don't fill it in, then there's 15 days, unless it's a cash transaction, then it's 5 days prior to closing. I personally, in my office at Paradise Coast Title, we don't wait. We get the title work started immediately. So I think that a 10 days is the most that you should give to get the title evidence out to the other side. It just needs to be done quickly. The title is super important for figuring out any problems that are to come up. In this case, we're doing a 30-day close. So it's going to be a quick close. We don't want title problems. Let's get that title commitment in as quickly as possible and get it to the other side. Okay, the next blanks are on line 172, 174, and 176, check boxes. Who is going to pay for title insurance? Now, if you saw the NABOR presentation, you know the buyer always picks and the seller pays in Lee County and the buyer pays in Collier County. But we're not in a NABOR contract, we're in a FRBAR contract. FRBAR gives you options. FRBAR says seller shall designate the closing agent and pay for the owner's policy, or the option is buyer shall designate and pay for policy, and then you have a special Miami-Dade provision that we're not going to get into today. Now, this is Collier County. By tradition in Collier County, the buyer pays for title, not by contract, not by law. It's totally negotiable, but we're going to stick with tradition today, and we're going to have the buyer pay for title. The next blank we need to worry about is our home warranty. Everybody skips home warranty on line 184 and 185. We're not going to do that. We're going to decide that the buyer is going to get their own home warranty plan. We're going to get it from, who's a good home warranty company? Home Tech, Donna. We like her. And it's not going to exceed $795. I don't know what the price is, but we're going to say $795. Okay, so we don't want to leave these blank. If we were not going to get a home warranty, we would check the NA box here on line 184. We're going to have the buyer get themselves a home warranty, so we're going to put Home Tech and put this in there. Next up, under special assessments. Very important section. Don't skip special assessments. I see these boxes skipped all the time. Who is going to pay for special assessments due prior to closing? Who's going to pay after closing? Seller, in this case, agrees to pay any special assessments due prior to closing, and buyer shall pay assessments due after closing. This is the typical choice. This is also the default choice if you skip this section. Notice that this is for public body assessments. So in honor of my friend Mike, who's on the call today, we're going to talk about the Marco sewer assessment. That will be paid by the seller in installments and the buyer after. There's also, like, for example, in Naples, the Bembury assessment, the sewer assessments for the area north of the mall. So there's a lot of special assessment areas. There's, if you're in Cape Coral, you've got your water sewer assessments. So you want to know who's going to pay for those and when. So don't skip line 194 and 196. This is a matter of negotiation. It can be a lot of money, so make sure you're paying attention to it. Okay, up next, very interesting in the FRBAR contract is the flood zone. If the property is in a special flood hazard area or Coastal Barrier Resource Act designated area, or otherwise protected by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Coastal Barrier Resources Act, and the lowest flood elevation is below flood, below the minimum elevation, what we call below flood. Let me get this out of our way so we can read this better. Then the buyer has 20 days by default to determine if they can get flood insurance. If they cannot get flood insurance, they can terminate. Now, in a 30-day close, that seems like a long time. So we want to have a conversation with our insurance representative as well as our lender, probably prior to contracting, because the astute seller is going to say, I'm not giving you a 20-day out for flood insurance. I'm going to give you maybe a 10-day out for flood insurance, or we'll do 15 and match the inspection period. Okay, so don't skip the flood insurance blank. And frankly, I think 20 days is a long time to figure out flood insurance, so I would lower that. Next up, this is an as-is contract. So on line 261, we need to give ourselves an inspection period. If we leave the blank on line 261 blank, it's 15 days. I think 15 days is a fine inspection period. It's almost a little long in this market. I'm seeing a lot more 7 to 10-day inspection periods, but we're going to let our buyer have 15 days to conduct inspections on the property. So we fill in 15 days, and that's a 15-day free look. So the buyer can get out at any time during the 15 days for any reason or no reason. At the end of the 15 days, they may be able to get out under the financing provision because we gave 25 days there, but it would be for financing purposes, and there would have to be a showing of good faith and diligent effort. Whereas under the inspection period, there's no showing of anything. It's simply the buyer may terminate. Okay, it's going through our contract. We've got our provisions that are standard, our default, our transaction standards for title and surveys and everything else. Not much else to fill in here until we get to the addenda. So in this case, we're going to talk about a couple of addenda. I have my notes. We're going to talk about the, where is it in here? Mold, if I can find it. Where is the mold? Yes, it's not in there. I thought this said mold, but we're going to talk about mold. So we'll talk about mold. Okay. We aren't going to have any additional terms today because as non-lawyers, we don't want to fill in additional terms without talking to an attorney because we don't want to have an unlicensed practice of law claim later. If you do need additional terms, there's usually an addendum for it. You have about 30 plus addenda that FRBAR provides. Go through those and understand them before you start writing in additional terms for things like compensation or furniture to be conveyed. We talked about how to do that already. Things like that. You wouldn't want, or seller financing. I see a lot of people will write in seller financing terms here. There's an addendum for that. Don't do that. So don't put anything in additional terms unless you have to, and then make sure it's blessed by an attorney. Next up, your buyer and your seller sign the contract here. You need notice addresses for purposes of notice. Please do not skip. Please do not skip the notice section. So again, let's figure out our buyer and seller addresses. I want to make sure we get this right. So let's start with our buyer address for purposes of notice. We have an entity that's a buyer. So let's go back to our screen under Sunbiz and see where the principal address of the buyer is. It's listed right here. See the highlight? 12970 Positano Circle. So let's get that in here. That's the right zip code, right? Yeah. Okay, the seller's address for purposes of notice, also very important. Now, when you're writing an offer, you're probably not talking to the seller. How do you know the seller's address? We go back to the property card, and lo and behold, the seller's tax bill address is listed right here under their name on the property card. So we use that as the seller's notice address. In this case, it happens to be the property. And then we fill in our brokerage information here so we know who is getting credit for the sale. And lo and behold, we have a completely filled in FRBAR as is contract. So the few other things I want to talk to you about today, first we have to save it. Yes, your form has been saved. We're going to close out of that. Next up, now you saw on the contract, I put myself as a broker. FRBAR requires, state law requires you to disclose if you have an interest in the transaction. So we're going to fill that in here. Sam J. Saad III has an active real estate license and has a personal interest in the property as the seller. So that's just something we want to put in there. See if I filled that out properly. So now the agents and the parties understand that I have a personal interest in the property. We'll save that. Next up, we're going to talk. I forgot to check the box for the flood insurance. We're going to do two addenda that we're going to talk about on this contract. First is the right to get flood insurance. If the buyer, you check these boxes here, homeowners insurance and flood insurance, and then read this. If the buyer is unable to obtain homeowners insurance coverage from a standard carrier or Citizens, not with a premium not to exceed so much, and let's just say 2% of the purchase price, or 1% of the purchase price, that's a lot of money. You pick your date by which the flood insurance, the homeowner's insurance must be determined. Let's go out 2 weeks. The buyer can terminate if they can't get homeowner's insurance. Also, flood insurance, in addition to the right to terminate provided in paragraph 10D, that's our NFIP program insurance. If the buyer is unable to obtain flood insurance, and again, let's go 1% by 2 weeks, then the buyer again may terminate. I think this is a very important addendum right now, given the flood insurance and the homeowner insurance situation in our state. It's an unfortunate situation, but it is what it is. So I'm seeing this addendum used more, and I want you to understand it. Does everybody understand this addendum? Any questions about it?
Sam,
Okay. Yep.
do they have this form for neighbor?
They do not. We're working on it. It's probably going to come out soon. I prepared one and we're working on it. The next addenda we're going to talk about is the addenda for mold. FRBAR, as is contract, you can get out for any reason, but maybe it takes longer to get the mold done. Or if you're not using an as is contract and you want a mold inspection, you need this addendum. So let's just talk about it briefly. Buyer may, at buyer's expense, have inspection of the property for the presence of mold conducted by a qualified and licensed home inspector or other professional that's a mold inspector. We're going to give them the same period as we do for the inspection. So we're going to lower the default from 20 days to 15 days. And then we're going to say if the mold inspection reveals the presence of mold that requires remediation or repair at a cost that exceeds, you can't get anything done for $500. Let's just say $1,500. Whoops. $1,500 I'm typing in here. Why is it doing that? The buyer may cancel the contract by delivering written notice within the mold inspection period. It's very important that you understand that if you want to terminate for mold, you've got or if you plan to negotiate for the mold remediation and you don't get it done within the inspection period, you have to terminate within the inspection period for mold. Otherwise, you're going to be locked in. Okay. Up next. The next thing I want to talk about is the required flood disclosure. You'll notice this is not an addendum to the contract, but a disclosure that all sellers of residential property in Florida have to provide. It could be the 10th floor condominium that you're selling. You still need to do a flood disclosure. And I will also tell you this flood disclosure is going to change October 1st to add a third question that has to be responded to. We'll talk about that in October when I'll do a special session on that. For now, there are two questions that have to be answered, Seller has or has not filed a claim with an insurance provider related to flood damage on the property. I have not, so we're going to check has not. And my second question, seller has or has not received federal assistance for flood damage to the property, including from FEMA. And flood is specifically defined as the overflow of inland or tidal waters, the unusual and rapid accumulation of runoff, or sustained periods of standing water resulting from rainfall. What is not said here? Pipe break. If the pipe breaks, it's not a flood claim under FEMA, and we're not worried about it because it may be an insurance claim, but it's not related to flood as defined by this addendum. I know there's some confusion about that, and I actually question it as to whether if I had a pipe break, and I made an insurance claim, would I check which box to check? The correct answer is has not, because it's not a claim with FEMA. Okay, save that. Going back in here now. The next two things that we have to provide in our contract is our energy efficiency brochure. Simply check the box for that and send it to your buyer. Very simple. And our equal opportunity in housing. Of course, we don't want to discriminate, and we don't want to be accused of discrimination, and we don't want any problems with discrimination. So we provide this 2-page brochure to our buyers. And lo and behold, we have a complete set of contracts. I want to go back into my as is because I realized I did not check a box, and I want you to have a correct and complete contract. Where is, it's on here, so mold and flood. Now, it's very important that you check these boxes for, oh, here it is. There's the flood one. Okay. Let's take that out of there. It's very important that you check these boxes, because if you don't check the box, you did not include the addendum with the contract. It's not effective. There is case law on this, and you will be in realtor jail for failing to include a required addendum. Okay, since we're selling a single family home, not in an HOA, we don't need any HOA disclosures, although I did want you to see it. This is the last thing we're going to talk about. Simply put, this is the HOA disclosure required under FRBAR. It is rider B. Whoops. Rider B. Put in the name of the community. We don't have a community here, but if you had one, it would be something like Lake Park Neighborhood Association, Inc. You fill in the amount of the regular assessment in the first box. You put in the time period, we'll say it's quarterly. Any special assessments go in this box here, the third box, and we'll say there are 0 special assessments. So we'll put in 0, and then there's no period, so we'll leave that blank. You do not put capital contributions in this section. If there is a rec fee or a land lease, it would go here in paragraph 6. My highlighting is not working very well today. Paragraph 6, there is none, so we're not going to do that. Now, if association approval is or is not required, the seller needs to notify the buyer of that. And then they have so many days to fill it in. And the seller has so many days to get the information for the association to the buyer. If you had a capital contribution fee, say it was $1,500 per year for capital improvements to Lake Park Association, you would fill it in like that. Then you determine who pays the assessments down here under 2B. The buyer pays or the seller pays if they're due after closing. We're going to have the buyer pay. Then you fill in your association management company information down here, and you put the association website here. And that is your homeowner association addendum. Notice, I'm not going to save this because we don't actually have one on this property. And that is our contract. FRBAR as is contract filled in about 40 minutes. That's a little long, but that's want to make sure you understood it all. Does anybody have any questions?
Hey, Sam, I have a couple quick questions.
Sure, Tracy, go ahead.
On the HOA form, I know everybody kind of does it different. So on the first page, there is the current association assessment. So
Yep.
I'm looking at one that's like 1,006 per quarter. And then on the second page, there's the payment of fees, assessments, and other charges. And some people do like you did if it's just maybe a transfer fee or whatever. But some people total all of them there. So like duplicate the one that's on the first page, which is correct, or does it really matter?
Either is correct. Just make sure the first page is accurate because there is case law that says that if you get that wrong on the first page, the buyer can terminate.
Okay.
So
And then
it's
my other
very
question,
important that the first page be correct. But I personally, if you're asking my opinion, I would fill them all in on the second page so it's clear
okay.
and make sure they match.
Yeah. And then my other question was on like the mold form that you did. If we're
Sure.
doing as is and we have a 10-day inspection period and we're going to match, the mold inspection 10 days, technically isn't that covered, or is the idea that you've already kind of negotiated that if there's mold repairs, but in the big picture, it's really covered, right?
Yes. So on the FRBAR or on any as is neighbor or FRBAR, you can terminate for any reason or no reason during the inspection period. I just wanted people to see the mold addendum. It's just if you were using a regular FRBAR contract, it would be more important.
Okay.
But on this particular form, it's not as important. And you'll see that I lowered the inspection period for mold to match the as-is inspection period. So in reality, it's superfluous, but I wanted you to see it. Excellent. Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, Sam, this is Cheryl Olilla. Did I miss what you said will be the third question that's going to be asked on the flood disclosure effective in October?
I didn't address it in October or shortly before it becomes effective. I'm going to do a new video specifically on the new flood disclosure, but there will be a third question to answer on the flood disclosure. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's very invasive and sellers are not going to like it. It's any flood damage.
Okay, and will that then also apply to neighbor?
That's a state law that will apply to both
Okay.
neighbor and FRBAR. That's right.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Other questions people have? None? Everybody understands the FRBAR. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all very much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you on my next video on Tuesday. Talk to you soon. Thank you.